thinking, he is so boyish. I understand, but I live here in LA now. I've had work done. What can I do? Very little of this is original, to be honest. I used to be called Deborah at one point. It was. We didn't have... Well, there were no computers. We didn't have computers. I mean, IBM had one, I think. But nobody had actual computers, not in schools. I think, NASA probably was investing in one. We didn't have photocopiers. Do you remember what we had instead? Exactly. Now, if I could just explain to you non-boomer types, others too, but there are three great domains you need to be part of the conversation, and they are education, commerce, and culture. And so I spend a lot of my time kind of trafficking between the three. And it's surprising to me how often there are misunderstandings which permeate the cultures of each of these three domains. How often people in business want what we want in education, but don't know enough about education, honestly, to get properly engaged with it very often. It's interesting to me how often people in education mistake what goes on in business and stereotype that in reverse. I don't just mean corporate organisations, I mean all forms of employment and wealth-generating type activities. And the third bit is the cultural stuff, because in the end, much of what we have to talk about is the lives that we lead and the quality of them and the sensibilities that we have. So I work in those three areas and kind of always did, but... Now what? What should we talk about now? The panel was interesting. It was a guy called Mathieu Ricard, who some of you may know, who is a French cell biologist. He used to be a French cell biologist. He's still French, but he's now a Tibetan monk and has been for 30 years. Amazing, beautiful man. He's written lots of books on happiness. He's taken part in scientific, research onto the effects of meditation. Matthew is recognised as being the happiest person on earth. You want to hang out with Matthew, don't you, really? Really. And you don't want him to be depressed on the night you get with him, really. You want your money back, don't you? Matthew, cheer up. Pierre Omidyar was on the panel. Pierre Omidyar is the founder of eBay, which was a good idea, wasn't it? I wish I had thought of eBay. I had D-Bay, it's like that close. And Pho Tutu, who is Desmond Tutu's daughter, an absolutely wonderful woman who's doing the same trailblazing work in South Africa that Desmond Tutu has been involved in for all his life. Eckhart Tolle, who wrote The Power of Now, wonderful man. And the Dalai Lama. That was the panel. So I'm moderating the panel. And I had to introduce them all. I had to introduce the Dalai Lama. I thought, how do you do that? What do I say? I mean, Chris thought he had his work cut out, but come on. The Dalai Lama. And then I thought, actually, I don't have to introduce him, do I? Because if your name starts with the, you're home and dry, aren't you, really, I think? Socially. I think if you've managed to collect the definite article along the way, you've arrived, professionally. Involved in various ways with education, because education should be the process by which people discover what they're really capable of and who they are. It should be the process by which collectively we address the challenge that we face, but I think too often the opposite is the case. And I don't say this in criticism of teachers or head teachers or schools or anybody. I've worked in education my entire life. I know brilliant teachers, fantastic schools, people who are doing their level best to make this work. The problem is bigger than that. It's a systemic problem. It's to do with the dominant culture of education that I think people are diverted from what in their heart they know they should really be doing. And I think of this, the consequences, as the other climate crisis. What I mean is we've got the idea, I hope, that there's a problem in the world's natural climate and in natural resources, but I believe there's a similar problem in our use of human resources. And there are lots of examples of it, like in America just now, and I live here, by the way, so I haven't come to take a cheap shot. I mean, I've lived here for 10 years, so But in America currently, I mean, estimates vary, but broadly speaking, if you look at the reports from people like America's Promise, broadly speaking, it's estimated that something like 30% of kids who start the 9th grade in public school don't graduate on time, and often not ever. Of course, they are critical to the education of every child, but they're not enough. I mean, when President Obama spoke recently, well, actually spoke at the State of the Union address earlier in the year, he talked about innovation, the need to meet the challenge of the 21st century, but then he only talked about the SEND disciplines. Well, you know, it sends a signal, doesn't it? I mean, the signal it sends is that we face these enormous challenges, and the only people who can sort these out are the scientists and the mathematicians. And if you don't happen to be into maths or science, if you're into something else, or you're not good at these things, well, you can sit this one out. You know, you can sit on the bench, and we'll call you when it's all been sorted. Well, it's a ridiculous idea that doesn't survive a moment's reflection, and yet it persists in our public policies of education. When we moved to America, we lived here for 10 years. Education, if we're going to get back to basics, is economic. It just is. And I think if anybody believes education isn't also about the economy, then they're just not paying attention. And we do, don't we? It's not even arguable. We all know that we invest so much in education, partly because of its economic benefits. And we know it's true from our own experiences, that we want our own kids, when they're educated, to have a better prospect of getting a job and being economically independent, don't we? Yes?
Yes.
I can't tell you how much I want my children to be economically independent. Yeah. And as soon as possible. The problem is that education is rooted on an old economic model. It's rooted on the industrial model, which is why there's a hierarchy of subjects in schools. Why certain subjects are at the top and some are at the bottom, because there are assumed to be economic virtues in certain disciplines. You know, the science of maths is more important for finding jobs. They're not, as it turns out. I mean, I'm not demeaning their importance, they're vastly important. But it's based on a mistake, the current economic model. The mistake it's based on is that life is linear. And life is not linear. It's based on a model of supply and demand, and our lives don't work that way. They never did. I mean, did you know, when you were at school, the circumstances that you live in, nobody encountering the challenges and opportunities that you have, and we create our life, and we make something of it, or we don't. Carl Jung said this once. He said that, I am not what has happened to me, I am what I choose to become. And human beings uniquely have these choices, in a way that other species do not. I mean, I don't know, I mean, if you've got a dog, I mean, I guess, physically, biologically, we're evolving, aren't we, the same rate as everything else on the planet. But culturally, we're in a completely different place, aren't we? Aren't we? I mean, on the whole, the culture of dogs has been pretty stable, hasn't it? You know, you don't have to keep checking in with dogs, do you? Like, what's the latest with you people? What's the new thing? And they say, well, pretty much the old thing, honestly. I mean, it's much as it's always been. But with human beings, there's always something new, because we have this restless capacity. So one of the things is that our current systems of education are based on a linear proposition. And the fact is, life is not linear. And if you look at the way the economies are moving, they depend upon the capacities of creativity and flexibility and adaptability. IBM published a report last fall, and, where they surveyed 3,000 CEOs around the world, and they came to the conclusion that the most important quality in leaders of corporations these days is the ability to foster creativity. And this is the great irony to me. When creativity is being crushed in schools through a culture of standardized testing, it turns out to be the very, in the interest of the economy, it turns out to be the very thing that the economy needs more than anything else. So the economic argument is found, and it runs in our favour. The second big cause for education, the second core purpose, is cultural. We live as individuals, but we live within communities, and the actual challenges that we face on the earth are not only economic, not even primarily economic, they're primarily cultural challenges. I mean, if you look at what divides people, if you look at what people continue to grind their teeth about, it's differences in value, differences in ways of seeing. We're still fighting, aren't we, a lot of the cultural wars of the Middle Ages. We're still trying to come to terms with these great rifts, and there's a powerful imperative, it seems to me, that has to be put at the heart of education to engage people to think differently about their own cultural origins, why they think the way they think, and the cultures of other people, to at least understand them not necessarily to adopt them, but to understand them and absorb them and to respect them. And the third big imperative of education is personal. And I just want to kind of say a word or two about this, and I know we're going to open this up to some conversation with Chris about some issues of implementation, but it seems to me the heart of it is this third purpose, which is personal. The reason I'm convinced that so many people drop out of education is because they think it's got nothing to do with them. And they're right, to a degree. That's what we call being in love with them. You know, when you are so finely tuned to somebody else's spirit that you feel, it's what Yeats talks about as having halved a soul, that you're connected in a very deep and profound way. So, to me, the personalisation of education is essential for every reason. One, it's about personal fulfilment. Secondly, because our communities depend upon people discovering things they love to do and contributing in all the various ways on which communities depend. But also because it feeds in directly to the dynamism and diversity of our cultures. And the problem is, I think, we've kind of washed out a lot of these differences in the process of the massification of education. On the assessment thing, I was struck by this, that there are two methods of quality assurance I've talked about in catering. One of them is the fast food model. You know, and the fast food model is based on standardizing. So if you're into any particular fast food brand, you know any outlet you go to exactly what you're going to get. It's going to be the same burger, the same buns, same fries, same cola, same chicken nuggets. What are chicken nuggets, by the way? Do you know? We lived in the countryside in England. We kept chickens. They did not have nuggets. Or if they did, they were sitting on them and they weren't going to reveal them to anybody. They were pretty cautious with them. Anyway, so standardization is what fulfills the kind of promise of the fast food industry. It's all standardized. It's all horrible, I think. It's all contributed to the worst outbreak of diabetes in the history of the planet. You know, but it's guaranteed. The other model are things like the Zagat Guide or the Michelin Guide, and they're based on a very different principle. They establish criteria of excellence, but they don't tell you how to run your restaurant or what to put on the menu. You can have anything on the menu, you can open when you like, you can serve wine or not, you can decorate any way you like. All the Michelin restaurants and the Zagat restaurants are different, and they're all much better than fast food. And they're all customised to local needs and possibilities. And what we've got in education over the past number of years is the fast food model of quality assurance, which is why I think so many people find it inherently frustrating. And what we need is the Michelin Guide. And it has one particular outcome, which I want to mention because it might come up in the conversation. Can I ask you, how many of you here, you boomer types, have had your tonsils removed? The same way with people and communities. If you create the conditions for growth, people will grow. There are wonderful schools everywhere that do exactly that. There's a school I was looking at recently in Chicago that was a Sync school 25 years ago, and since then, every single kid in the school has graduated and gone on to a life that had some purpose and meaning, and it's because they had a brilliant head teacher and a motivated faculty who directed everything to standards of those children and created a broad curriculum where they could all flourish. I see it time and again. Schools that have been suffering with a change of leadership, with staff who are motivated, and the place is transformed. I've seen great schools go down just as quickly because the wrong style of leadership came in. It's impossible to overestimate the impact that teachers and head teachers had on the culture of the school. And in the end, culture is absolutely everything. It's about recognising the conditions under which people flourish. I think the core problem is this, that very often governments go into command and control mode. They think they have to tell everybody what to do. They don't. They should get out of the way and let people do the thing they're good at. Their job, like all great leaders, the job of all great leaders is not command and control, it's climate control. It's creating a climate in which people can flourish. And we understand quite a bit about those conditions, and I know we're going to talk about them in just a minute. But you know, people thought of this harvest in Death Valley as a miracle. And in a way it is. You know, if you see plants grow, gardeners don't make them grow, they grow themselves. Kids don't. You don't grow them, they grow themselves if you create the right conditions. But miracles are everywhere in the natural world, but they are in the human world too. If you have a teacher that's free to do their work properly, within a proper framework of accountability, led by a school that understands how the culture of education works, then you start to see these transformations happening all the time. And I've seen it time and again throughout my career. People have been failing, turned around, because somebody looked them in the eye and got them. I'm not saying it's always easy, but the principles are unavoidable. But when you talk about miracles, it sounds like they're exceptional, but they're not. If you're dealing with people, if you're working with education, there are miracles happening all the time and every day. And knowing how to make them is the art of teaching. But if you're in teaching, if you're in education, you are in the miracle business. And it's a great business. Thank you.
To lead their own lives instead of being led. In the same vein, Lee Fitzgerald from Wildwood asks, how can we truly work to make parents partners, but not enablers in the educational process from K through 12? Sierra Canyon School asks the underlying question we'd like you to explore, perhaps with some attention to the difference between public and private school strategies. How do you recommend recruiting parents to partner with?
How education should run, and very clear opinions about what they want their children to do, and can be very categories, blended and challenged and all that. I mean, there's a certain amount of rebottling that goes on here. I remember reading something recently where it was recommended that instead of kids sitting at their desks, we should have higher desks so they can stand at them. And it's like people lose their minds when they start to think about education. Like one of the things that we do in schools routinely is we divide people up into age groups. Why? Why do we do that? We don't do it outside of school. We don't make sure all the 4-year-olds just keep to themselves outside of school. It reminds me always this of, if you go to the Natural History Museum, you'll see, if you go to the insect house, you see all the butterflies in one room, all pinned in descending order, dead, encased against the wall. You go to the next room and they'll have all the beetles, and the next room all the arachnids. Well, it's a way of looking at it. But outside of the Natural History Museum, if you walk outside, you don't see all the butterflies over here. Flying around in graduated sizes. And all the spiders scuttling over here, just in colour-coded, these are institutional habits that we have adopted. We create our own misery, and then we try and think a way out of it. And I suppose what I always encourage people to do is kind of relax about this. That there are some things that we know to be true. Let me give you an example. I've been doing a lot of work in Oklahoma over the past number of years. Oklahoma, on innovation and creativity, Oklahoma wants to become the state of creativity. Now, what? You see, it's interesting because there's nothing in the rubric that says you have to have 45-minute periods, nothing in the rubric says disciplines can't work together. They're habits of mind that we live in, that we've invented for ourselves, and then we live in this trap. And then we need to find ways to break out of it. So, to me, the whole thing is about looking to ways to be creative in the classroom, to innovate in the curriculum. And all these have merit, and yes, of course. And I got to know them a while ago. They didn't enjoy their own time at school all that much, and now they've got kids. They didn't want to put their kids through the system they disliked. So they decided that they should start their own school. So they founded an elementary school, which is called the Blue School. It's in Manhattan. I think they're up to about 200 kids now. And it's just a very short, I think it's 6 minutes, this. But the reason I thought I might show it tonight, since we're talking about elementary education in particular, is because it also illustrates some of the other principles I've been trying to touch on, which is about creativity in our own lives. They talk about their own journey and what they're trying to do in the school. Now, it's a work in progress, it's not finished. But it seems to me a great example of how we create our own lives and then evolve them. And at least to try and apply those principles in the way we educate our children. So it's about 6 minutes, and we'll just have a couple of minutes maybe at the end before we all go away again. But Michael, if you would, thank you. We need to put the line. And of course you need then to pass that through the assessment system and accountability and everything else. But if you're interested in also, and I assume many of you would be, there was a whole report I chaired a few years ago, or 10 years ago now, called All Our Futures, Creativity, Culture and Education, and it's on my website, and this new book, Out of Our Minds, is an attempt to try and work that through in a bit more detail. I just want to read you one last thing, if I may, because I think you'll like it. Have you noticed that Microsoft Word, I did the new book on Microsoft Word. Have you noticed that Microsoft Word has opinions? Have you noticed? I don't mind if it has the little red squiggles if you make a spelling mistake or mistype it, but it gives you green squiggles, doesn't it, if it doesn't like your sentence structure. I don't like this. I mean, like the passive voice. It doesn't like the passive voice. So you can't say this conference was convened because it's passive. You have to say who convened the conference. What would have happened to all the great works of literature if they'd been written on Microsoft Word? You know, if John Milton had written Paradise Lost in Word, it'd all been this like jaunty vernacular, wouldn't it? But anyway, it doesn't always work out for them. I wrote this sentence, let me just put my hand on it, it was about the development of intelligence testing. This is a true sentence, by the way. I wrote this. The foundations of the modern intelligence test were laid in the late 19th century by Sir Francis Galton, a cousin of Charles Darwin. That's true. The foundations of the modern intelligence test were laid in the late 19th century by Sir Francis Galton, a cousin of Charles Darwin. Microsoft Word didn't like that. It has the passive in it, were laid. So, didn't like that. Suggests the alternative. This is where it suggested, really. In the late 19th century, Sir Francis Galton laid a cousin of Charles Darwin. Anais Nin, the writer. Anais Nin talked about her own creative growth, and she said, it's just a way, I thought it was a very interesting metaphor she used. She used this organic metaphor herself. She said, there came a point in her own life where the pain of remaining tight in a bud was greater than the pain it took to blossom. And I think that's a really important observation, that we expend a huge amount of energy, in a way, containing our own creative energy and the creative and imaginative energies of our kids. And it's actually less effort and more rewarding to release those energies and to create something that's powerful within the school. And I don't believe you can predict the future, but I think if we understand properly the real pulse of creative energy within ourselves and our children, then collectively we'll create a future that we'll want to live in. And I believe that's the mission, really. Thank you.